Welcome back, friends. This is our second CSS class, and this one focuses exclusively on texts and fonts. It is jam-packed on all you'll ever need to know on the topic, so let's get right to it. So if you're like me, you might be fuzzy on the difference between text and font. You might use them interchangeably, and I'm not so sure it really matters as long as in the land of CSS you know what to apply when you need it. So generally speaking, though, text is about the content, right? The text content, and the font is used to display the content. So the things that I can do with text in the land of CSS is I can change its position, I can change how it behaves, I can change the alignment or the orientation, and then I could also apply shadow on the text side of the equation, although that kind of breaks our definition here, but that's the land of CSS. On the font size, I can do things like change the font face that I'm using or change the weight or the style of the font. So basically, those are the differences. And as we get into some examples, I'm sure it will crystallize this for you in your mind. So before we even get into the wonderful world of text and fonts in the land of CSS, let's talk about some shortcuts, because as much as we can, we want to make use of what is already out there instead of reinventing the wheel. And one thing that I have been using for a number of years now is something called Google Fonts. You might be aware of it as well. Google Fonts is an API that you can use to make your font and your website look better. You don't need to do any special programming. All you have to do is add a special style sheet link to your HTML document and then refer to the font from Google Fonts in question that you'd like to use in your CSS style. So what I give you here are two links. One is the parent link to getting started, and the other is the link to the font catalog itself. And on the right-hand side, that's what the font catalog looks like. You can search for specific fonts. You can try them out. It's really a lot of fun. Here we have an example of how to employ Google Fonts. So on the top part of the page, you see my HTML document, and you see the link here next to the arrow is the link to Google Fonts that you'll want to place in your HTML document in the head section. In the bottom, you'll see that I'm employing Google Fonts in one particular Google font called Open Sans. That's the family. And then it falls back to sans serif if it can't find that. For whatever reason, it can't find Google Fonts, or that particular font anyway, it will fall back to one of the 5 generic types that CSS recognizes, which is sans serif, which is in that family. And here's how nice it makes it look when you use Google Fonts. It just is a level of finesse that we don't have with the generic fonts that we can use. But you have nothing to compare it to, so in the next slide we'll show you that. Okay, so here we have it. On the left-hand side is without Google Fonts, just generic, and on the right-hand side is with Google Fonts. So I don't think there's any comparison. The right side just looks nicer and cleaner and more presentable. Okay, now we'll dive into CSS, and we'll start on the text side of our equation, and we'll start with the line height property or attribute. On the right-hand side is my CSS. On the left-hand side is our HTML. So the first thing we show you is what's normal, and I'm going to show you the output on the very next slide. So normal line height is roughly equivalent to the height of 1.2 units. Then we're going to have the unitless number multiplied by the element's own font size. This is the preferred way to do it. It avoids unexpected results due to things like inheritance. And then finally, we'll have length. And length in CSS is a data type that represents a distance value. Length can be used in numerous properties in CSS, such as width, height, and margin. So here we are showing a length of 4 ems, and ems is defined roughly, it's a unit of measurement as well. It's defined to be the font size for a given font. So the value given in ems here is 4 ems. So we'll see on the next slide how each of these differs: normal, unitless, and length. Let's check it out. So the definition of line height is that it sets the height of a line box. It's commonly used to set the distance between lines of texts. The normal one looks normal. Then we have the second one where we were using unitless, or a number, in this case 2.5. This used value is the unitless number multiplied by the element's own font size. Again, this is the preferred way to go. And then finally we use the length property. And this again can, especially when we use ems, can produce unexpected results. So the favored one, if you're going to set the line height, is the unitless, the second choice in the middle. I'll expose you to how you can handle hyphenated words through CSS. So assume we have a hyphenated word. The hyphens property enables us to control how words should be hyphenated. So if we had a word like blueberry bush, a very long made-up word, we could control how that's seen. So on the top left, I have my HTML document. On the right, I have the CSS document. And the second rule, .hyphen, is the class that I'm using. I use the hyphens property set to auto with a font size of 75 pixels. So our possible values for this is none. Words are not broken at line breaks. Even if characters inside the word suggest the line break points, lines will only wrap at white space. That's doing nothing, setting it to none. Manual, words are broken for line wrapping only where characters inside the word suggest line break opportunities. Then auto, which I find to be the most useful. The browser is free to automatically break words at appropriate hyphenated points following whatever rules it chooses. Like so many things with CSS, this is dependent upon things like font size, right? If I had my font size set too small, it wouldn't necessarily be able to show you the effect of this. So sometimes we're working in the land of CSS and we say, oh, this doesn't work at all. Well, it really depends on many things. As you see when we go further in the presentation, it could depend on not only font size, but font face type, a whole bunch of stuff. So always be mindful of that if you feel like it's not working. So before we get into our next property for a text, let's talk about the difference between inline elements and block elements. So the major difference is that for inline elements, a line break after the element is not there. With block elements, we have elements that tend to stack on top of each other vertically, but in inline elements, like a span tag or like an image tag, they tend to stack horizontally, so they go from left to right. So what I'm about to tell you now, for Overflow-wrap, this applies to inline elements only. It sets whether the browser should insert line breaks within an otherwise unbreakable string to prevent the text from overflowing its line box. So it's a pretty important thing. On the left-hand side, as always, I have my HTML document, and I have two different sections here within span tags. Of course, that's an inline element, which is why I'm choosing to use that rather than paragraph tag, which is a block element. And on the right-hand side, I have my CSS document. The first one is set to type normal. The second rule is set to type break word. So normal lines may only break at normal word breaks, such as space between two words. Anywhere, this is to prevent overflow an otherwise unbreakable string of characters like a long word or URL may be broken at any point if there are no otherwise acceptable breakpoints in the line. And then there's break word, which is what I'm using in the second example, and I'll show you in the next slide. The same as anywhere, with normally unbreakable words allowed to be broken at arbitrary points if there are no otherwise acceptable breakpoints in the line. So it's the most flexible. It's the one that I favor. So let's take a look at it. Okay, normal on the left side, break word overflow on the right hand side. So I use a ridiculously made up long word, and you see what happens. It overflows the box. When I use break word, it forces it at a non-normal section to make sure that we don't overflow. Now we'll move into aligning our text. And the definition of the text-align property is it sets the horizontal alignment of a block element or table cell box. So once again, we're not in inline, we're in block elements. And I'm using paragraph tags because that is of type block. So on the left-hand side, I have my HTML document. On the right-hand side, I have my CSS document. And my text align here is set to left, center, and justify. Justify, very handy. So let's go through the definition. Left, the inline contents are aligned to the left edge of the box. Right, to the right end. Center, the inline contents are centered within the line box. And then justify, the inline contents are justified. So text should be spaced to the line up to its left and right edges, except for the very last line. So let's take a look and see what that looks like. All right, and here are our three examples: aligned left, aligned center, and justified. And of course, there are different applications for different things, but to my eye, the justified always looks great. And you can easily see why it will make sure that it goes to the left and right edges pursuant to any padding and margin set. But the last line would not accommodate. Of course, if I run out of text, it has to stop where it is. And that's exactly what happens in this third example. So use whichever ones work for your particular application. Okay, and now we have vertical align. And this definition says that it only works for inline block, or table cell boxes. So not block. If you try this with a paragraph tag, it won't work. So on the left-hand side where I have my HTML, I have text that wraps around an image in every case. And in terms of our 3 rules in the CSS document on the right, I have the image set to top, bottom, and middle. So text top, text bottom, and middle for our vertical align property. So you see here how we use the image selector plus the class. So top or bottom. So it's img.top. We haven't seen that yet. img top bottom. So take particular note of that. Let's see what it looks like. Okay, so here is our output for the vertical align property. So the first one is the default, and you see the text is justified to the bottom. And notice that's the same as the text with the bottom align, so those are identical. The second one is the image with the text top alignment. And then one of the more pleasing ones for me anyway is the middle alignment, and that's the final one. Okay, next we have a pretty straightforward property, text-indent. So if you've ever indented text in a word processing application, you'll know exactly what this is. This sets the length of empty space that is put before lines of text, hence indentation. So you could select this by either the length that we've done before or the percentage. And here on the right-hand side in my CSS document, for the class Text-indent, you see that I've set the text-indent to 15%, the very first line of that rule set. And you see what it looks like here. You might have call for this sometimes. I don't think this is very pleasing to the eye, but again, the right tool for the right application. Next is text transform. So what are we going to do with text transform? This is all about specifying how to capitalize an element's texts. So on the left-hand side, I have 3 different examples within my HTML document, and I have my corresponding CSS code on the right-hand side, and I first capitalize, then I change to uppercase, and then I change to lowercase. So this is all probably very familiar to you. And again, the property is text transform, the very first line in each of the rule sets. Let's see what it looks like. And our output is as expected. In the upper left-hand corner, we have the capitalized version. So every single word in our paragraph is now uppercase, the rest lowercase. Then we have our uppercase version, which is down at the bottom. Everything's uppercase, and lowercase on the right-hand side. So works exactly as it's advertised to. And here the white space property lets us define how we want to handle white space inside an element. So we have normal and we have no wrap. For normal, white space is collapsed. New line characters in the source are handled the same as other white space. Lines are broken as necessary to fill line boxes. So that looks like the most normal, right? Hence it's plain up to its word. Now for no wrap, it does exactly what you would think. Collapses white space as normal, but suppresses line breaks or text wrapping. And 3 other values here. We have pre-wrap, and pre-line in order of appearance. And here for pre, lines are only broken at new line characters in the source and at break elements. For pre-wrap, lines are broken at new line characters, at break characters, and as necessary to fill the line boxes. And you see how strange that looks in the second example. And then we have pre-line, and lines are broken at new line characters, at break characters, and as necessary to fill the line boxes. The difference between pre-wrap and pre-line: for pre-wrap, sequences of white space are preserved. For pre-line, sequences of white space are collapsed. All right, we have one more to show you. And here is break spaces. This behavior is identical to that of pre-wrap, except any sequence of preserved white space always takes up space, including at the end of the line. Look how bizarre this one looks. And you might have call for this to just have it whittled down that way. I mean, there is something nice to it, maybe for a poem. A line breaking opportunity exists after every preserved white space character, including between white space characters. Such preserved spaces take up space and do not hang, and thus affect the box's intrinsic size. And now we're on to word break. So first we have the normal variety. It uses the default line break rules. Then we have the break all, and this is to prevent overflow. Word break should be inserted between any 2 characters. This is excluding Chinese, Japanese, and Korean text. And our output example: normal on the top, break all on the bottom. You have to look very closely to see the difference, but break all it breaks on these words here, and it doesn't do that in the normal one. All right, and we'll finish word break with the keep all version and the break word version. Keep all, word break should not be used, as we know, we mentioned in the last slide, in the Chinese, Japanese, or Korean languages. However, the text for non-Chinese, Japanese, or Korean languages behaves just like normal. And then break word has the same effect as word break. We'll see what they look like. So I mentioned this before, it really depends on your parameters, and given the parameters of my paragraphs here, these end up looking identical to the normal version. The keep all version for the English language will be identical to the normal variety, no matter what we do. And now we have word spacing. So we'll use normal and the length variety. So the normal inner word spacing is used with normal as defined by the font and the browser that you're using. And then length specifies extra spacing in addition to the intrinsic interword spacing defined by the font. So we'll see what they look like. And as you would suspect, in the length version, there's a lot more space in between the words. So if you need that effect, that's how you accomplish it. Now, CSS would not leave us without an option for the orientation of the text. So here we have the text orientation property. And this sets whether the lines are laid out horizontally or vertically. And there's two versions, left to right and right to left. Let's check them out. All right, left to right on the left-hand side and right to left on the right-hand side. Again, depending upon the application and what you need to do. Okay, and here we have text shadowing for our texts. And this does exactly what it says. It adds shadow to text. If you've used any of the Microsoft suite of products, they give you the ability to do this as well. Each shadow is described by some combination of your X and Y offsets from your element, blur radius, and color. The mandatory settings are your first two, the X and Y. The blur and color are optional. So you see on the right-hand side, I have some variety of each. X offset is first, Y offset is second, then my blur radius and my color. So I have 1 pixel, 2 for the blur radius, and then the color black. And then it goes from there with the different varieties, but always needing the 2 offset set. And here's what these 4 examples look like. I brought in the CSS code so you can compare and contrast. And it really does make sense. For instance, if you look at the very last one, where I have my X set to -20, you see how it's very far off the actual text element itself. So it does make a lot of sense. And CSS also gives us the ability to affect either the first word of a sentence or the first letter of a word. Here I show you the first letter of the word variety. And this applies style to the first letter of the first line of a block level element. And it's only when not preceded by other content, such as an image or inline tables. So as you would imagine, this uses CSS pseudo element. You see here .fl is my class. FL is my class. You see it in my HTML document. And then I have my first letter, 2 colons and first letter, which of course is this element, which is the pseudo element. And you see what it looks like on the right-hand side for 3 sentences. Whatever I have in the rest of this rule gets applied to each of the first letters. All right, so now we'll make that shift from text to fonts. We'll focus on fonts from here on out. Did you know that CSS recognizes 5 generic types of fonts? Well, it's true. The 5 fonts are serif, sans serif, monospace, cursive, and fantasy. So let's define some of these you may not be familiar with. Serif, in the world of graphic design, is the small extra stroke found at the end of the main vertical and horizontal strokes of some letters, like a T, for instance, that hangs over. That would be a serif. Monospaced font, also called fixed pitch or fixed width, or non-proportional font, is a font whose letters each occupy the same amount of horizontal space. So monospace often in textbooks are used to demonstrate code, JavaScript code, Python code, that type of thing, even CSS or HTML. Monospace would be used for that. So here, what do I have for you? I have those 5 generic types in order in my HTML document and my corresponding CSS document. So let's see what they look like. Okay, and here they are. Serif, sans serif, monospace, cursive, and fantasy. Sans serif is really the one, it's the one that we're using top down from Google Font. It's the one that we imported in, not sans serif. We used their own font face, but basically that way it doesn't have those little, see how the T kind of hangs over? And it has that little something extra, the serif, or the L in look in serif, how it just has a little something extra instead of the straight up bar in sans serif. That's the difference. And now we'll move on to some other very popular font descriptors. So we'll start with font family. So what does that do? This allows authors to specify font styles for the font specified in the font face rules. So basically this allows you to either have an italics font or an oblique font. So let's see what those are. We have normal, italic, and oblique. Oblique specifies that the font face is an artificially sloped version of the normal font. So sometimes it's even hard to tell the difference between italic and oblique. If you look at font style 2 versus font style 3, very subtle differences. And that's going to, again, depend upon the font that you're selecting. Now here we have the descriptor of font weight. And these are extremely dependent upon the font type you use. I use serif here. If I used anything but that, I really couldn't perceive the difference between some of these types. So this gets me more bold, less bold font type. For example number 1, I have bold. For example number 2, I have lighter. For example number 3, I have bolder. For example number 4, and I use a number, and I'm using the font weight of 900 for example number 5. And again, subtle, hard to tell the difference here. Last but not least, we come to the Swiss Army knife of CSS fonts, the font property. As I like to call it, the font combo plate, where you can combine a whole bunch of different elements. Now, the only thing required is that you pass it the font size and the font family in that order. Everything else is optional. So you see where I have an example number 1, italic, 900, small caps, 30 px, veranda, Helvetica, and then down to example number 3, where I simply pass it a size, 250%, and then sans serif as my font family. Everything else is optional, and you see on the lower left-hand side exactly what that looks like. And to end this training, I give you 2 helpful links for your learning pleasure: the MDN web docs and the wonderful interactive CSS cheat sheet, where you can go and manipulate and test things out before you apply them in your own code. Okay, coding family, thank you for watching till the end. If this class has helped you, consider helping me to continue to bring these classes to you and others. Helping is easy. Just do the following. First, subscribe to the Yogi Coder YouTube channel, and all you have to do is click on my little icon here on the lower right-hand side, and it'll bring up the subscription button right away. Next, you can leave whatever comments or questions you'd like. And finally, share this video on any and all social media channels with your friends and your colleagues. Thank you again for watching, and until we meet again, happy coding.